Hello, folks. This is the next day. Don't ask me why I always have to look away from the telephone. I don't like looking at myself eye to eye because it's intimidating. I'm just kidding. Okay, so in my lap were my notes. So I'm going to go ahead and talk to you guys. I worked a little bit better on. I'm just going to use not the Streamlabs OBS program. Apparently, it just doesn't work well with my computer, and I'm having issues trying to get my computer to accept the operational parameters I would want it to have for is it Chrome? No, it's Windows. Wait, no, it's Xbox Game Bar. Okay, so I got the mic to work. I figured out how to turn it on, and I figured out how to turn the camera on, only I don't see myself, or I don't see a little thumbnail picture of myself, so I'm not really sure how that's working. And the only thing I need to do now is try to figure out why the refresh rate is constantly going and basically blurs my my video of what it is I'm trying to show to people, even if it's not even a video that's moving. Like, you can move Google Earth in there. If I'm showing you something like Word doc that's not moving, it's a still picture, it still has a refresh rate that continually goes and makes it look like there's ghosts behind the letters. So basically, the Indonesian Impactor has a blast impact point, or you might call it the pop, the point of penetration. And it was a penetration, and as it blasted, it created ripples. So the blast crater is actually rippled into the shape of an oval, and that's how you know it's an impact crater. Right beside it appears to be more like the center of Indonesia, if Indonesia was to be the actual impact point. So what we're going to explain is that the Pennsylvania North Reef is the impact crater with the ripples, and just to the east of that you have Reed Bank. So basically, when all that material came back in to fill the void that was created by the displacement of all that matter after the blast, and the vortex was activated, so to speak, it created that mound of the Reed Bank at the center of that vortex, which is off from the actual point of the impact. And that's basically going to be the product of that particular vortex being cyclonic versus anticyclonic. So it wasn't sucking matter in. At that point, it was pushing matter out. Okay. Now, when we look at the 16 hours and 34-minute days on a Jupiterian 13-stripe period, I'm going to pull ahead, and you can watch my elbow. I have to drive to work, by the way. That's going to be, if you cut that in half and add that half, well, when I say cut it in half, right, you subtract 16.30, or excuse me, my bad, 16 minutes 34 seconds from 24 hours. Did I say 16 minutes? I meant 16 hours. 16 hours 34 minutes from 24 hours, and then you take that what's it called, that difference, and you cut it in half, and you add the half of that difference back to 16 hours and 34 minutes, and you're going to have the approximate rotational time of Earth during a Jupiterian 11-stripe period. And remember, the Jupiterian 13-stripe period is strictly theoretical at this point with me. I don't really have strong enough stuff that I could honestly say that, I really strongly believe that the Earth was going that fast at that time. However, if you're going to have an impactor hit with a greater magnitude, it's going to be a much greater magnitude if the planet is spinning around faster. All right. Now, there's other things I wanted to look at, but if I don't hurry up and get on the road here, I'm going to be late for sure, and I could easily lose track of time by talking about things that I really love to talk about. So we've got the different rotational speeds, and we already know that the rate of rotation is affected by at least for our solar system, is affected by the galaxy, which is driven, and then the planets are driven primarily by the solar system. And when I'm saying that the planets are driven primarily by the solar, or by the sun, I'm telling you that because we have planets that may not necessarily be rotating in the same direction, in a prograde direction, as the majority of the planets in our solar system. All right, now I don't think that we really know what the possible forces behind those alternating or those different rotations, the retrograde rotations, could be. So I'm going to tell you what I theorized those forces that are causing these other planets to rotate in a retrograde direction is. And that is that these planets very likely may lie closer to the galactic influence of the SME buffers and less so close to the E buffers, did I say SME buffers? SME buffers are supermassive electromagnetic SME buffers. Supermassive electromagnetic braided field ropes. Together with gravitational waves, you have SME gauze. That's what I meant to say. And then you have the e-gauze, electromagnetic gravity waves emitting from the sun, in the shape of a flying saucer. The common concept of a flying saucer, where it's like a plate underneath, a rounded plate or a shallow bowl, and then on the top it's the same shape of that the opposite side of that shallow bowl, and then a bubble window where the little alien guy sits, right? So that's pretty much that's pretty much what the galaxy looks like, and that's pretty much what the solar system looks like. And the reason there's no window bulb at the bottom of the galaxy or the solar system is because there are greater external forces outside of that that do not allow for that bubbly bulge to exist. Let's see, so what else do we have? Yeah, I'm merging on the freeway. I might have to pause for a moment to make sure I don't merge into somebody. No competition. That's what I like. All right. Now I gotta go back and try and figure out what it was I was thinking. Bright lights out here. Woo, getting a little hot in here now. I'll turn the heater now. Yeah, sorry folks, I'm trying to bring my thoughts back to what it was I was just talking about. Oh yeah. So planets that rotate in a retrograde direction. So basically, their external influence is a greater influence coming from the galaxy, and a weaker influence coming from solar wind pressure from the sun. So as the sun's e-gauze move further and further out to the solar system limits, they taper down to a point. And so when you get farther away from the sun, there is as much solar influence on those planets that lie out there. They're for their rotation. So they, at their ecliptics, might even, and their orbits around the sun, they might even be offset to where there are certain times when their particular orbit takes them completely out of the solar influence of the solar system's plane, in which case the majority of their time could be spent in the galactic influence and hardly at all spent in the solar influence. That could play havoc on those planets. That might mean that either their rate of rotation is decelerated or accelerated upon entry or re-entry into the solar system each time they pass through the solar system plane. So who would know that, right? I don't know. Can we even measure that? I don't know. Probably. If we send somebody out there to put a beacon on that particular planet, like Pluto. Right. Oh, wow. I'm being a major yo-yo. Check that out. Good thing nobody's around me. Okay. That's what I wanted to mention there. Now, let's see. So I'm still struggling to try to get something set up that's just as nice as anybody else's stuff on YouTube. I don't want to have a bunch of squiggly, giggly, weird stuff going on in my video when I'm trying to show people what it is that I'm looking at. Because in a lot of cases, what I'm looking at is like a hairline fracture at the elevation that I would be at, showing it to the viewers, and the slightest disturbance that could come from refreshing would probably make it almost impossible for the viewer to actually see what it is I'm speaking about. So I really got to get that stuff fixed. And as it stands right now, I already came to the conclusion my computer's not smart enough. So I got to go out there and get me a smarter computer. My wife already calls it old, but we just got that thing not too long ago. But we only bought a cheapie, We didn't want to spend a lot of money on computers. I just needed something that I could write a book with. And as long as I could look at Google Earth and it works fine for me, and I can sit there and do all kinds of crazy things on Google Earth and then, think about how I want to write a book about what it is that I believe I discover. That's all I needed it for. Until I decided I wanted to start doing it faster and get something out there in terms of videos that I could put on YouTube and share with people sooner. Yep. I found out what that big long convoy of logger trucks was yesterday. So the name of their group was Timber something. And I guess they had a protest that they did in Salem, Oregon, and yesterday they probably were heading up to Olympia. So if they're doing it in between states and it's some kind of a gathering, lobbying about legislature, then I don't know, maybe it's a federal legislature or something like that. Otherwise, why would they need to go to two different states, right? Unless all three of the Pacific Northwest states decided that they were going to come up with their own commingled legislature for whatever it is that these folks are not happy with. Who knows? Yep. So, let me think. I'm going to go ahead and try to put that video I made yesterday on the air, and kind of left off with, like the center of the universe, that kind of thing. I didn't really go into detail on the different types of universes. As far as I'm concerned, there's really only two types. The one that I've already mentioned that I'm referring to as being like the main event type universe. It's an open explosion, and it just doesn't have the magnitude you wouldn't expect that would be strong enough to create the conditions or set the conditions for life as we know it to exist at the capacity that it does. So that means the burst had to be a lot bigger, a lot meaner. And you're just not going to get that unless you have potential energy building up in a specific location, in a concealed or a contained location. That's all there is to it. I just can't buy into the whole infinitesimal nothing that blew up into a beautiful universe that we live in. It had to build pressure first, and I've already given or made videos that I haven't and won't put on the air because, you know, one of them I kind of freaked out after a meteor flew out of the back of a dump truck and hit my car. I'm sitting there talking about outer space and the universe and stuff, and then I got this big noise, and I'm like, what the heck? At least, I guess it hit the undercarriage, because I looked all over the body of my car, couldn't find any damage. But, I mean, you can imagine what my choice words were when that happened. I scared the crap out of me. So, yeah, I'm trying to keep those off the air. That kind of ruined my whole concentration. Although I'm trying to do it again, I'm driving to work. It seems to be okay right now. No crazy people, no flying meteors out of the dump trucks. So basically, your second type of universe is going to be the one that we live in. Now, my theory is there are two possibilities in terms of what kind of enclosed area would be the type of area that could host the potential energy that would be required to create a universe such as the one we live in. And so those two possibilities that I'm thinking of, either one might be capable of creating a extraordinarily large planet-sized geode. So basically you have this geode flying through space. Now, inside that geode you have all kinds of gaseous type things going on, right? That leads me to think that there's a possibility that gas giants could have a core that could develop into a geode, and then the gases from, say, the planet are already encased inside this geode, and then due to their own environmental conditions, they begin to expand and basically break down and multiply in some form of beta decay, right, process. So the other one would be possibly the core of a star. But when you think about the cores of stars and how they collapse and they become even more dense than ever, I'm not really sure what the possibility of finding a geode space inside of that stellar core is going to be. But at least from the stellar cores and the stellar novas and things like that we see, we know that something about that stellar body causes that stellar mass to erupt into a supernova, right? Novas and supernovas. Maybe there is no such thing as a nova blast. It's always a supernova. I'm not really sure. But if that's the case, then that means that pressure was building up inside the core of that star. That's the only way you're going to get a blast. That's the only way you're going to get stellar shrapnel flying through outer space. Period. And so actually, now the more I think about it, I think maybe universes of the right make, like ours, could actually have begun from a stellar nova. So the thing is, we get supernovas all the time, but our supernovas that we're witnessing are occurring in the warmth of our universe. Yeah, warmth, right? You go out there, if you're human, you go out there, you freeze to death. But in terms of universal bodies and subjects, as if the universe is the king and everything lying within and lying or existing within the domicile of the universe would be a subject to that universe, then they're confined to the warmth of the universe. So that means that if you want a universal type eruption or explosion to occur, it would have to occur in a much, much greater intensity. And for that intensity to take place, it probably would have to be cold fusion. Now, why would I say cold fusion? Well, because if you start thinking about quantum physics, and we decide that the cosmological constant is 0 Kelvin, and we now know we can actually create the settings or the conditions for a temperature to drop below 0 Kelvin, whereby activity begins again. Atomic activity and all that begins again, only at a more efficient rate. So you end up with this basic geode that's flying through space, say for instance on the blank canvas of a universe, whereby the cosmological constant is at 0 Kelvin. But the conditions inside the geode become like a massive freezer that basically sets the conditions for major sub-Kelvin or sub-0 Kelvin temperatures, initiating and igniting the life of atomic energy. And we call that, we talk about that as being a more efficient form of energy, where pretty much all of that energy is used up. So then when the four fundamental forces of nature start coming together inside this geode and beta decay starts taking place, we can say that theoretically they develop a gas, and in that gas it expands inside this geode until finally that stellar geode reaches critical mass. And as it reaches critical mass, it has a bursting point. And when it bursts worse than Mount St. Helens ever did. So now it blasts. Now we know that, or we theorize that supernovas are the birthplace of neutrinos and antineutrinos. Antineutrinos are probably more powerful than the neutrinos. And we're going to suggest that this stellar geode that bursts into a universal nova creates a massive abundance of antineutrinos that are blasted through space. And since neutrinos, and I presume antineutrinos, can pass through matter like it's not even there, well, that means that they have the capacity to pass through matter or to travel at a much higher rate of speed than light. So now you have your product that can travel faster than the speed of light. And when it does travel faster than the speed of light, antineutrinos become what I call ballistinos. So, neutrinos and antineutrinos, neutrinos for sure, I know I read that they can pass through matter. Antineutrinos, I'm assuming, can do the same. But if they're passing through matter and they don't really have an effect on that, what I can tell you is there's no way they're going to pass through each other. They still have the same, they're going to have same or similar masses to each other, and they're going to be like billiard balls. So if they're not flying in the same direction and they collide, they're going to bounce off of each other, or they're going to be like hydrogen and helium coming together in a form of fusion, right? And then they're going to do some other weird thing. Who knows? But they're going to be doing it at a rate of speed that's faster than the speed of light. Now you've got the elements you probably need to create a universe that is like ours. And I can't remember, I know I should try to remember all these things, but I made so many videos now and said everything in all of them that I don't know which parts I've covered and which parts I haven't covered that will really go on to the internet. So there might be some blank holes out there in my story. So anyway, we're talking about this stellar geode that erupts into a universal nova. And you have three blast ranges. Blast range number one, where the ballastinos are blasted out at their highest rate of velocity in an omnidirectional direction, which is only omnidirectional if there is absolutely no resistance, no friction, no pressure from any other angle around that universal nova, which is not going to be the case. So in just the same way that we have universal jet streams, I'm going to suggest that we also have cosmological jet streams. So you're going to have a universe that is erupted and born inside of a universal environment by which there will already have been established cosmological jet streams. And the pressure from the cosmological jet stream in which this universal nova explodes is going to be the base pressure for that universal nova. And so what you're going to see is a force that begins to rotate the universe in which we live. And it's going to make the base of that universe flatter than the top of that universe. Just like the external forces affect the galaxy and affect the solar system. And when we look at what we perceive to be funny looking galaxies and things of that nature out there in space that don't look quite like ours, don't get them wrong. They are trying like crazy to be just like us. We are the epitome of a balanced, well-fed system and controlled system, right? And basically they're just out of control and they're unstable. We know that they're unstable. There's all kinds of unstable relationships we see out there, such as binary relationships, especially like you see between a star, like a normal star, and then maybe a neutron star, and where the neutron star is sucking everything away from the nice star, like a vampire. All right, so there you have it, right? Now we got these jet streams that start to spin the universe around, and you got a whole lot of stuff. Oh, we were talking about ranges. Okay, range one. So basically the ballastinos in range one, which range one's extent is going to be relative. It's going to be dependent on the overall diameter, or the overall greatest measurement in distance that the universal nova extends to. Its furthest most point is going to be the end of the third blast range. and then you just divide that distance by 3, and you have your ranges 1, 2 included with 3. So that's what we're talking about. So basically in range 1, theoretically, we are looking at ballistinos that in our opinion would appear to vaporize everything in their path. And in the so doing of vaporizing everything in their path, just like the Indonesian impactor creating that void, the universal explosion creates this void, and all of these antineutrinos, these ballistinos flying through space at a speed greater than the speed of light, create this super ultra powerful void where the cosmos is trying to crush the universe right back into where it was before it burst, which was basically the dimension of that stellar geode. All right, so it actually is trying to crush it to a part, some degree smaller than that, the size of that geode. It wants to crush it down into its smallest common denominator of. So that's what we're looking for. And then, but you see, even though we might visually believe that everything in the range 1 distance is effectively obliterated beyond its own existence, is probably not true. In my opinion, and there was some ding-dong on the internet quite a few years ago who suggested that things do get vaporized and you never see them again. Yeah, I don't buy into that. There's a signature. We just don't know what it looks like. And if you don't know what the signature looks like, you don't know what to look for. If you don't know what to look for, you're never going to find it. All right? So you kind of have to know what you're looking for before you can just sit back and say, that doesn't exist. Like the atom. We had to know what we were looking for before we started looking for the atom. Otherwise, we didn't know what we were really looking for. Sometimes we trip over things. We're like, I wasn't looking for that. There it was. Boom. Hey, what the heck is this? Oh, I think I'm going to call it an atom. I'm just going to spell it different so it doesn't sound like Adam and Eve, that kind of thing, I'm going to call it atom. I don't know. I'm just pulling that out. Well, anyway, yeah, I'm just hanging on. Yeah, it's just kind of funny. I like to joke about that. Only with myself, because most of the time nobody wants to listen to me. So, whoops, am I in the wrong lane? No, I'm not. Okay, now, we already pretty much beat the dead horse on range 1. So range 2, we have the ballistinos traveling through space faster than the speed of light. And that's not me. That something traveling faster than the speed of light is actually a theory developed by Dr. somebody or other. Dr. Guth? Dr. Guth. That was Dr. Guth. Anyway, so pretty much the only thing you're going to get that's going to travel faster than the speed of light is something that doesn't get obliterated when it runs into something. And in this case, it's not going to get obliterated. It's going to be the obliterator. And it's not necessarily because antineutrinos maybe and neutrinos can pass through matter without having issues. So then it isn't the antineutrino or the ballistino in and of itself that it obliterates or destroys the universe, tears it apart. It's the vacuum void it leaves after it passes through an object. And that void is far more devastating and catastrophic than the ballistino itself. So that's like a 50 cal round being fired over your head, and the bullet passes by you so close that it rips the skin off your arm and the meat. And what makes me think of that? Well, I once had a battalion commander who fought in Vietnam, and he might have been more than a battalion commander. He might have been a brigade commander by that time. He was a brigade commander probably. He fought in the Vietnam War, and he had a 50 cal round fly right over him, and it ripped the meat off his forearm. it didn't hit him. He never got hit by the round, but the vacuum from that round passing over him so closely took the meat right off his arm. So, I mean, he had limited use of that arm. Permanent damage, of course. And that's the kind of thing you get with Ballestinos. So, now, you also have all this matter that they're sucking into this huge, horrible swath of tightly banded together vacuum in space that's not only leaving a huge vacuum type void at the center of their blast, but also following them as they move through the cosmos out into and fan out into the shape of an oval or something to that effect, correct? And then you hit range 2, and in range 2 they're starting to lose velocity because they're going against a lot of friction there, because basically the cosmos isn't really happy about the idea that these guys are trying to move in and take over. So as they slow down, the effect of their damage is reduced, and the reduction of that damage results in their ripping matter apart, like you would expect buckshot to rip something apart when you fire a shotgun toward a pumpkin or something. And they just start tearing the cosmos apart at that rate. And the cosmos is a dirty place, folks. It's not clean. There is no such thing as a blank canvas. But if you want to start figuring out how the cosmos would work from an order of origin state of mind, you have to theoretically devise a blank canvas. And that's how we're thinking about the universe, the infinitesimal nothing coming from nothing that blasts into this life, this universal size of life. And so we're basically stuck on the whole blank canvas thing. And the point of the matter is, I don't believe the universe ever had a blank canvas. And I know for us it's very difficult to imagine something that has always existed, because it seems like everything should have a beginning. Everything seems to have an end. Why wouldn't it have a beginning, right? Well, it does have beginnings, but not to the sense that stuff in the universe or stuff in the cosmos is non-existent. Yeah, you know, you can't get something from nothing. That's all there is to it. All right, putting my coffee down. Here, check my gear, make sure it didn't pop out of the hooligagging. Okay. So that's range 2. So now you can only imagine what range 3 brings to us, right? So as the Ballestinos continue to lose their velocity and they decelerate in their rate of passage through the cosmos, they hit range 3, and in range 3 they're not ripping through quite like buckshot. Now they're just basically becoming more like the catalyst to igniting the life into elements that are highly volatile and sensitive to unstable environments, and bleep, 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 suddenly all the lights come on. And then as that occurs, just like we see on Earth, where everything that we see in a nuclear blast is burst out from the point of explosion, and then it reaches zero speed before that plume at the ground level gets sucked back into the void that the explosion created in our atmosphere to begin with. And then, so in blast range 3, the Ballestinos are going to their furthest extent before they reach a state or a point where they're no longer traveling anywhere. And their existence in terms of traveling outward comes to a screeching halt. And all of the light bulbs that they turned on during that range are now going to be sucked back in toward that central plume. That would be the center of our universe. And this is, and as they are, they end up reaching certain points within that region, and basically up until the point where the universe creates its vortical eye, you have even greater volumes of terrestrial matter that collect into bitzos, or the beginnings of black holes that will later at some point host stellar clouds that are so numerous in stars that it looks like a stellar cloud, right? And then all of these stellar clouds are going to start getting sucked into these black holes that are just mega massive black holes that we've never seen the likes of. And that's when you start to see the beginning of the universal distributor cap. All right. There it is. The universe we live in. That's the kind of blast you need to create something so massive and wonderful as the universe we live in. And you're just not going to get that from a fart cloud in the middle of nowhere, under no pressure except for external temperature pressures or something of that nature, right? You have to have something that is compressed beyond its capabilities to where it eventually reaches critical mass, and that potential energy stored to the point before it becomes that massive destructive property that creates a universe that gives life to beings such as ourselves and other beings. Don't be naive. We're not the only ones in the universe. We really need to get away from that singularity thought. And we're probably not the brightest ones out there either. That's kind of an arrogant sort of an impression of ourselves. And how do we know we're not the brightest ones out there? Because we're still learning. That's how we know. As long as there's something about the universe and something about science that we can continue learning, then we're not the smartest ones out there. Period. Somebody's already been there, done that. In the very same reason and manner that, you might be a real tough guy and you might be able to whoop a bunch of rear ends, but there's always going to be someone out there who's tougher. You just haven't run into that someone yet. So we just haven't really run into the smarter someone yet, to the extent of them exposing themselves to us. Well, anyway, so there you have it, right? Let's see, video's still going. Whoops, better stay in my lane. All right. What else we got going on? So, I was talking about speeds of rotation of the planet. So in a sense, you would think that back in the day, maybe 4.4 billion years, is going to be greater than 4.4 billion years ago. 4.4 billion years ago, before present, is when the Earth became solid, at least for the most part. So it was on or about the time the Earth's planetary sutures connected and sealed. So that is not how long the Earth has been in existence. The Earth would have been in existence long before that, and who knows for how long that period would have lasted, while the Earth was in its wholly molten state. looking more like a brown dwarf, which, by the way, when we look into space and we see brown dwarfs, those might not be stars, folks. That might just be a planet that's developing that has not fully developed into a solid surface. It's a baby. Sorry if it sounds like I'm yelling, but I feel like I have to yell to speak over the noisy roads. When you go over that concrete-ish looking part of the freeway, it makes more noise than the asphalt. Yep. So I'm getting closer. I'm still going to go buy a new computer. The only drawback to getting a new computer is I'm not sure if I can transfer all of my squiggly lines I recorded on Google Earth to a new computer. Last time when I bought this computer and it was my new computer, I had to start all my squiggly lines all over again. But I didn't have so many squiggly lines then as I do now. That would be time consuming. I'd have to go back and record every single one of my impact crater locations and my all of my vortical locations, because there's a lot more vortices in the surface of the Earth than just the primary vortices you see at the 6 coordinates. So, especially if you look up there around Nunavut. Yeah, that's something I can talk about. So basically I was saying that, you know, the Indonesian impactor sparked a whole swath of chain reactive events, and and I decided that it was probably really more likely the Indonesian impactor than, say, for instance, the North Pacific Oceanic impactor, because the Indonesian impactor absolutely would have been far worse. Excuse me. Far greater and far higher, much larger, well, you know, bigger magnitude, whatever, I don't know, whatever you call that stuff, right? So, anyhow, some of the events that it triggered, I already mentioned, yeah, the Fiji Island vortex, the New Zealand vortex, and then how those are linked in with the two primary vortices, which are the North Banda Basin vortex and the Antarctic polar vortex, right? So what I didn't necessarily mention is that in addition to that impactor triggering a state of worldwide liquefaction, which triggered the activation of the primary vortices, you basically kind of already had the separation in the northern hemisphere of, at least possibly, of North America migrating westward away from the massive continent of Eurasia and so on and so forth. And in the southern hemisphere, you still had South America connected to Africa. They had not separated. But the Indonesian impactor was by far the catalyst, most likely the catalyst which allowed the rotation of South America, the pivotal rotation of South America and Africa, in order to be enough to separate those two continents from each other and basically force Madagascar apart from Africa. So Africa pretty much sits right on top of the Lake Victoria vortex. And the Lake Victoria vortex is rotating counterclockwise. We got a cockatoo going. Well, I didn't see him coming up for way back. So then you have time for me to merge over because I'm gonna have to get off the flea ray. So let's see. What was I talking about? Oh, pivotal rotations of continents. And the Sapaliwini continent of South America had a pivotal rotation that was clockwise, and well, the continent had a pivotal rotation that was clockwise, which was actually a faster rotation than you get from the primary vortex, possibly. And then you wind up with this ropey, umbilical cordish kind of terrain feature that connects the Magellan Strait to the most prominent spiral density arm of Antarctica. Yeah, we have ourselves a great big earthquake, a great big accident right here, where I'm getting off the freeway. Well, those people aren't going to get to work on time. That's like well, this is a new month. They just had an accident in like this very same place like a week or two ago. All right, so I talked about the continental pivots in the southern hemisphere. And the pivots of those continents, they not only spun the continents in the directions that they spun, but it also caused those continents to elongate into more of the shape of what you would see in the virga of a cloud. Lots of traffic. I'm only doing 55 for some reason. For some reason, everybody's driving uber slow. Even the guys in the left lane are like poking along. Other than that, are going faster. Like, what is taking everybody? Damn it! Trucker Bob up here needs to speed it up. Okay, so now I think I was mentioning the Atlapac fracture probably in yesterday's video, and a lot of what I'm suggesting is not, it's just not, doesn't seem to be accepted by, at least not by the scientists I've been speaking to. They're pretty set in thinking what they believe, and it's interesting, but I'm the outsider, you know, without the credentials that are needed. Oh, that's why everybody's poking along. I don't know why they're going slower than the speed limit. That must really irritate the heck out of the law enforcement folks, you know, where people just become so paranoid that the officer is trailing them and stuff that they slow down to a point that like creeping along the road. They're not even doing the speed limit, and you're just like, guys, he's not going to give you a speeding ticket, if you're not even doing the speed limit, unless maybe it's one of those places where if you're going too slow, you become the opposite, the anti-hazard of being a speeding hazard. Now you're the poke-along hazard. Crazy people anyway. All right. I don't know why this guy's sitting here trying to connect to my bumper. It's like, dude, nobody's going anywhere. Putting tracks on my bumper isn't going to get you there sooner. Well, anyway. Okay, so I just mentioned the pivotal rotations of South America and Africa. If you're interested in Australia and why Australia doesn't really look like a virga, well, Australia was once a part of Antarctica. How do I know all of this, right? What gives me the impression that I could actually come right out and say this? Well, because, ladies and gentlemen, before I began any of this, I wanted to piece and I wanted to put Pangaea back together. So, in order to put Pangaea back together, I started tracing every single continent to include, and not limited to, every cape and every single bay and all that other stuff, cove, all that stuff. I got it all. And I started putting these continents back together. That's when I discovered that you have global distortion. And I was like, wow, this makes it really hard. So it's kind of hard to put something round onto something flat and make all the pieces connect, unless you cut it up into orange slices, like those better maps where the earth is broken apart into orange slices. Because when we look at a flat map of the earth and Greenland is all together on this flat map, well, that's why Greenland is so huge at its northern border. It's because they drew a line that they stretched the terrain features, enlarging them way beyond their natural appearance to make those points connect. The points that are closer to the central location and region of the Arctic Circle. So you end up with a Greenland that's like 2/3 the size of what it really is, and it's more triangular than anything. So you wonder why. Well, if Antarctica basically was always at the bottom of the earth and Australia broke apart from Antarctica, why is Australia close to the equator? Well, that's because centrifugal force is also pulling continental masses toward the equator. And gravitational force is pulling the heavier masses toward the equator and in toward the core of the planet. And so Australia is pulled toward the equator and westward, while the northern continents are being pulled toward the equator and ultimately toward the South Pole, while also spiraling toward the west. And then being elongated into these shapes of virga, continental virga. Yep, video's still going. Alright, we must have hit quiet road because I don't feel like I have to scream and yell as loud anymore. Noisy roads. Terrible place to make a video, I guess. Well, anyway. Not really too concerned about COVID-19. Not yet. It hasn't really struck any kind of level of what I would consider to be pandemic in the state of Washington. But, yeah, who knows, right? And the more global the people become on the planet, the more difficult it's going to be to tackle these new bugs. So people might wonder, well, where are these new bugs coming from? Well, you know what? The Earth is getting pummeled by cosmological, universal, and galactic junk every day. That's how, the Earth has never stopped coalescing, so to speak, right? It's stopped coalescing or it may have really slowed down in its coalescence of crap inside the solar system. But there's still crap everywhere, and it's constantly hitting the Earth and landing on it. And that's where you get sediment a lot of the time. And it just keeps building and building. Earth is just going to continue growing and growing and growing, just like every other planet in our solar system. And along with that comes bugs that were capable of existing in extreme conditions that were pretty much I don't know, trans-astrological or something. And then voila, there you go, some foreign bug. It was just enough to make people sick, and the animals get it first or whatever, who knows. Alright, so what else have we got going on down there? Yeah, we had the Atlapac fracture I started to hit on. So the Atlapac fracture basically might have had something to do with the Earth's. Oh, you're terrible, dude. You drive like crap. Okay. The Earth's planetary sutures. So, which isn't exactly quite in the form I would have expected a suture to be. I would expect the suture to be more equatorial-ish, going around the planet and cutting the planet in half. But maybe it didn't. Maybe the circumstances weren't quite right to create that sort of environment for the suture to connect. But anyway, the fracture from the shock of the blast of the Indonesian impactor it slipped. So it had a lot of pressure up against it, and then it unlocked that pressure, and that potential energy had slipped. That potential energy in turn triggered asthenospheric tsunamis. Now, the terrible thing about these asthenospheric tsunamis is that they travel beneath the continents. They travel beneath the lithosphere. And they're going to travel far, wide, and fast until centrifugal force pushes them up and out through the lithosphere and the Earth's crust at the Earth's exterior weakest points, or the weakest exterior points. And then you end up with semi-molten waves, 29,500 feet tall, moving up. They might be fast, they might be slow. I'm going to tell you this right now, they're fast. How do I know they're fast? Because if you look at the Aleutian Islands and you look at the curl at the beginning of the shape and form of the Aleutian Island asthenospheric tsunami, as it formed the Aleutian Islands, and you only have to go just a little distance east of the Kamchatsky Proliv before you see the curl that was created by the speed of the current of that asthenospheric tsunami before it surfaced, creating the wave crest that eventually became the Aleutian Islands. there you go, folks. Okay, so and then the volcanoes you see that run along the Aleutian Islands were the last remnants of the vents relieving the pressure that was coming up from underneath from that asthenospheric tsunami. So yeah, it's in the asthenosphere that you have the Jupiterian lithostreams that create the Jupiterian stripes scores on our planet's surface. But these asthenospheric tsunamis basically override those lithostreams and become the greater force. So you have you know that Japan was at the crest of one of these asthenospheric tsunamis. Another asthenospheric tsunami that was even further west, but triggered from the same general vicinity of the Atlapac fracture. It was a different segment of that fracture. So each segment of that fracture triggered east and west tsunamis from that fracture as it slipped. So the next one is the fracture that created and generated the asthenospheric tsunami that flowed south and westward and until centrifugal force found it a weak spot. But the difference between this particular Russian asthenospheric tsunami is that it did not come up above the surface as you see the Japanese crest coming up above the Pacific Ocean. It instead only pushed up the crustal layer of the Earth into what we now see as the Himalayas. That's why you have a smiley face shape in the Himalayan mountain range, okay? Because the wave, that's how waves work. And if you follow waves along, all of those waves have a bow to them. They have a bow in their shape. And that's the shape you get when you look at the Himalayas. It wasn't India that was pushed up into the Himalayas. India is at the what's the name of that? What's that word? It's at the apex, the northern hemispheric apex of the tangents of the two primary vortices, which are the Lake Victoria vortex that's rotating counterclockwise, and the North Banda Basin vortex, which is rotating clockwise. But the tangents of these two vortices create a flowing tangent because the flows are going in the same direction, a northward direction at right there. I already called it a tangent, so what else do I call it, right? And that's what gives us India's pointed shape. So India's pointed shape is not a virga, a continental virga. It is an apex. It is a continental apex. Just like North America, Mexico is also a continental apex. Apex. Well, anyway, there you go, right? It's fun stuff, right? All right, so now, what else happened? Well, you not only had the Russian asthenospheric tsunami that pushed up the Himalayas, but it also, at a later point, at some stage, created Earth's very own supermassive volcano, Earth's very own interpretation of Olympus Mons. Only it's not near as big as Olympus Mons. Olympus Mons, even though it's on a planet smaller than the Earth, is bigger than the supermassive volcano that was created by the Russian asthenospheric tsunami. And that volcano, ladies and gentlemen, is the Taklamakan supermassive volcano. And why do I say it's a volcano and not a desert or some old lake bed? Well, because you can see the lava flows that were not high enough and I guess not hot enough to go through the Rocky Mountains, go through the Himalayas, right? So they were forced to follow the northern base of the Himalayas until they were finally able to flow up and around the east and west limits of the Himalayan mountain range. And as they flowed up and over the eastern limit of the Himalayan mountain range, because of centrifugal force and the coefficient of solar wind pressure drag, that particular eastern flow was forced straight southward into the already existing vortical structure of the Indonesian Impactor blast radius, which is what created those semi-molten waves that you see. So there's different things that cause semi-molten waves to occur. But the semi-molten waves are pushed out by centrifugal force, which is weaker than gravitational force, by the way, in case nobody's tracking that. So you have three conditions. One, you have an asthenospheric tsunami that's looking for a weak spot in the surface of the Earth. Two, you have the pivotal event of a continent and its vortical parent, like primary vortex, like, say, for instance, Sapali-Winnie vortex, as the continent of South America did a catastrophic pivot of so many degrees. I can come up with the degrees later. And as it did, it helped create the Dominican Islands, right? I'll have to go back on that. I'm pretty sure it's the Dominican Islands. If it's not, it's Cuba. Oh, one of those islands down there in the Caribbean come around on that little lumpity-doo. And that's where you get that lumpity bump. So it not only pivoted South America, but it also caused South America to separate from North America even further. At the same time, it was rotating in its spiral, southwestern spiral as it's going toward the South Pole, right? And that's where you get that really funny stuff down there going on, with that funny Earth-like stuff going on. Don't you like it how I always repeat the same words because I run out of things to say? All right. So then you have, this guy's going to get mad at me, so I'm really poking along really slow. I'm not exactly, I am kind of on time, but I'm blabbing a lot. I'm almost to work now. So anywho, you got the Himalayas and the eastern lava flow. Now, the funny thing about this is, at the time before the Taklamakan supermassive volcano erupted, the Caspian Sea was not an enclosed, landlocked sea. It was actually open to and part of the Persian Gulf, in addition to the Arabian Sea. That was all open. And that was a void that was beginning to take place when Pangaea most likely was actually at the North Pole when it first coagulated and began spinning apart at the North Polar vortex, the Arctic, what would have then been the Arctic vortex. Or the Pangaean polar vortex. So then the western lava flow coming away from the Taklamakan supermassive volcano ended up flowing up and over the western limit of the Himalayas, heading south and then west across the planet, going all the way, believe it or not, all the way to the tip of Spain, right there by Gibraltar. It was massive. And the reason it went that way mostly is because of centrifugal force, in addition to the coefficient of solar wind pressure drag. And that lava flow is what mostly created what you see to be Iran today. And it is the land that locked the Caspian Sea into being, wrong turn signal, the world's largest landlocked sea ever. Rat. Cool stuff, right? We wouldn't have wanted to have been there at the time that occurred. That had been really scary, Himalayan size lava flows. I was talking about the three types. So you have the asthenospheric tsunami that creates massive waves. You have continental pivotal events, and then the third one is going to be your catastrophic earth impactor events that create these huge voids that on the outside ring of those voids, as we see around, especially around the moon, right? You have all these great big mountains. It's the same thing. Well, on Earth, it was a semi-molten crested wave of lava, which which created that Pacific ring that we see right there encircling Indonesia. Okay, I have to go now. I got to go to work. Bye.